if I can invite the panelists back onto the stage. We're also going to be joined by two further panelists, KELSEY Blakely, who is a fraud specialist, previously worked at Visa and Square, now heavily involved in the fintech sector, as well as EMILIO ROCCHI from Threatmetrix, who's a senior solution consultant. Come and join us. Right. So we have a good 45 minutes to sort of bury into these topics in more detail. And I really would like some questions from the audience. I'm hoping the feed works so we can actually see in real time which are the most popular questions. And I definitely will respond to those. I have my own questions to kind of get us going. Really, I'd personally like to sort of frame the discussion around, understanding what the attackers are doing, what the state of fraud is today, and then moving on to what we can do to defend against them. And also, secondly, kind of really root the conversation through the lens of a merchant and their customers. Okay, so just to kick off, guys, what is the true state of fraud today? I mean, who are we actually winning the battle against the fraudsters, and to what extent is actually the fraud techniques shifting, and can we kind of keep up with that? I mean, we'd like to sort of each sort of make a kind of comment in turn, perhaps starting with you, Steve.
Well, according to the latest figures, really, fraud is still on the increase. As many protection scenarios are out there to stop it, fraudsters and criminals find other ways. And it comes as no surprise that there are forums on the dark web that share this information across the digital platforms, and a lot of companies that are at risk. The issue, of course, is about data breaches and the amount of data that's actually out there. Your personal data is out there. There was one expert from a particular country that told me, Steve, don't worry, your details are out there, they just haven't got round to you. Interesting.
Emilio?
Sure. I would first introduce myself. I think I was missing. My name is FAHEEM, and I'm head of payments of Kingwin. Kingwin is a global marketplace where you can actually buy and sell games on the internet. We are over 7 million users, and we are, of course, present in every country where there's high risk and low risk. And of course, for us, we have a various amount of fraud. So we have different products. We have around 12,000 products over the platform. And we have high-risk product, for example, gift cards. We have low-risk products like games, where you can actually redeem a voucher. So if a customer is trying to buy a gift card, he tries to redeem the voucher, and then it's very difficult for him to refund in order to, if the payment gateway doesn't go ahead, sometimes we try to make an advance purchase, so on and so forth. So risk in our I would say in our platform is quite a lot, especially for those who wants to buy the keys in bulk. And we have our own risk API. Of course, we have a lot of attackers every day. We have, for example, in PayPal, if we don't have a risk platform, we definitely losing because, of course, PayPal is sometimes focused more into customer. They try to refund them instantly. And whether it comes for a credit card or MasterCard, it definitely makes us even more insecure in terms of transaction. This is why we choose safe payment methods, or we definitely make sure that we try to reduce the fraud rate. And at the moment, our industry has around 5% on an average fraud rate, which we try to manage in our own API, and we're looking forward for even more customer authentication, even stronger.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you for inviting me for the panel. I introduce myself. My name is EMILIO ROCCHI. I'm currently the consultant for Threatmetrix, focusing on preventing fraud in the digital channels, so mobile and web. And previously, I'd been focusing also on cross-border payments. Maybe back to your question, I think it's key here to understand, well, data breaches are happening every day. They're huge, massive data breaches. We've seen where companies from Travel, Cathay Pacific, for example, Yahoo, huge data breaches, but we have a lot of means today to prevent fraud, so not only to tackle fraud, but be able to be proactive and prevent. And as my colleague explained, identity is very important. So out there's a lot of solutions from biometrics, different step-up authentications, But I think the key question here is merchants. You're a merchant yourself. You know your customers. You know the behavior of your customers. So therefore, understanding behavior and identities of your customers give you a lot of tools, weapons to actually prevent fraud. I think we can, I'm seeing a question about how this will put the PSD2, put more fierce competition among PSPs. I think still key, so merchants know their customer best. So it's a shared, I think, responsibility whereby actually the merchants, knowing their own customers, they have the tools to actually identify those legitimate returning customers.
Great, thank you. Kelsey, and quick introduction.
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Kelsey. I'm formerly a fraud manager at Square, but I'm now moving back into the issuing space, so I can kind of speak to both worlds. One thing I think I'd add to what's been said already is that fraudsters they're kind of lazy, right? Like they'll do what you allow them to do. And while we can talk about them evolving and becoming more sophisticated, they're also doing pretty sort of simple attacks, like things like phishing. So in the tech space, for example, one thing that's really popular these days is not to have a customer support arena or a customer support call center. And if you don't have one, then one thing that fraudsters will do is they'll spin up kind of these fake call centers, and they'll vish or phish your customers with very simple data. And all they have to do is have a fake website with a fake 800 number on it, and boom, if you don't have a customer support center, they're then vishing your customers for all sorts of information. So in the US, they can get anything like your bank account, your social security number, your address, and other personally identifiable information. So we can talk a lot about the sophistication of fraudsters, and that's true. They're evolving as we evolve our detection, but they're also continuing to do these kind of simple methods, and I think that we shouldn't really lose sight of that fact either. So that's just one thing I'd like to add.
Thank you.
Good point, yes. My answer is pretty short. So it's no, so we cannot stop fraud. No way. But if it comes to credit card payments and 3D secure is mandatory, then you're not liable for that anyway. It's just shifted to the issuer. Then this is done. If it comes to other payments, then you need to have something in place that the fraudster approaches your competitor in best case, yeah, not you. Where you can just stop maybe this one approach, but if you stopped him at this one approach, then he will just try and try and try, as long as he's successful. And as I said, just try to shift him to your competitors, and then everything is fine.
Great, thank you. So look, there's some burning questions about SCA and PSD2. I think this is the most relevant topic for us to address. So let's get into that. I think in the European context, obviously SCA is set to change a lot in terms of fighting fraud, and this is a very interesting question. What is, in terms of the point, the utility of merchants to buy fraud solutions if the issuing bank has either a conservative approach to and will step up and challenge using SCA, or ultimately also have the so-called last say in whether or not that step up takes place. So, guys, what is the point of, what is the role of merchants in terms of fighting fraud going forward in this new SCA world that we're entering? Who'd like to go first?
I would like to start. Maybe always remember the balance between also customer ease, so seamless experience, not add more friction. Anyways, strong customer authentication will add friction. So it's about how to find the balance between, the
Disagree. Strong customer authentication will not add friction. I think that it's going to be a necessary process of protecting payments. You're seeing customers today already in the mode of using their biometrics with their device or knowledge-based questions. This is not going to actually add friction to a customer. There may be some abandonment rate, but the majority of customers today, consumers, are already doing this. They log into their bank accounts with the fingerprints, with the face, with the voice. They're used to this modality today. 60–70% of customers are using it today. So I really disagree that it's not friction. It's not a big deal when it comes to the payments, because it will only hit two-factor authentication at certain risk of certain payments cross-border and so on. So I'm sorry to disagree with you there, but
no, it's fine. This is the idea.
Let me challenge you. I think personally that biometrics is to some extent like obviously the way forward, but some people are concerned about the intrusive nature of biometrics. I mean, obviously, touch ID is one thing, but going beyond that, and also sort of passive authentication, all the different data sets that are being kind of obtained from us. I mean, some consumer attitudes are quite hard, and they're not necessarily softening towards, biometrics. So
there'll always be customers that will be opposed to it because of lack of understanding what's actually happening with the data. Typical question is, well, what's happening with my face? What's happening with my voice? Is that going and exporting elsewhere? I don't want to hold the panel discussion on that, but you really have to understand the nature of biometrics and what it's for. It's about convenience, about replacing friction with passwords, knowledge base identities, which cause problem infection. That's the biggest threat to customers today, is they can't remember passwords. We're constantly having to go through password resets. If we get locked out of an account, we've got to phone the contact center. I mean, how many people in this room have to phone a contact center to get their account unlocked? So you do have this kind of element. There is GDPR. Of course, the issue there is that consumers will have to give explicit consent to use biometrics. And that includes everything, including behavioral. And a lot of behavioral consent is buried in T's and C's. That really is a bugbear for the industry because consumers do not read the T's and C's, as we know. But there is a specific caveat within GDPR that says merchants, banks, and all enterprises must have a tick box to say, we can use your biometrics in order to allow you access to your account.
Excellent.
So,
any comments?
Yeah, so maybe just to round up, maybe I agree partially with you, but depends on which channel. So we take web, mobile, and I think we think here globally, depending which country, how savvy are the population as well. So it has to do with a lot of education of the consumer as well.
Absolutely. There's a long way to go on that.
Yeah, I take a slightly different approach. Of course, I'm very US-centric. Most of our business is in the US. We don't have an SCA mandate. But I was in an industry meeting a few months ago where one of the major card brands is trying to convince me to implement 3D Secure 2.0. And they say, look, you can pass 200 data elements onto the issuers. Well, maybe it's very arrogant of me to think this, but I have over 3 million active customers. I know who they are. I think that I am better at preventing fraud in many ways than the issuers are. And what do I get out of sending these data elements to the issuers who ultimately have approval decisioning? And I think that we were going to talk about this later probably around how much data sharing should we do in the industry. But it makes me uncomfortable to pass all of those data points knowing that the issuers don't have to do the same to help me in my fraud prevention efforts as well. So it's a slightly different way that I approach it, and of course we don't have a mandate yet. I think that we may move that way in the US, but that's kind of something that gives me pause around how we pass data along through our ecosystem.
I think you're right again. It's not only Europe. If you sell outside of Europe, then you have other regulations in place. And I'm with you. You should know maybe your customer better than the merchant, because the customer uses you to pay at different merchants, and not just at one. But to switch off the fraud solution totally because of I'm not liable for that anyway. I think it's a stupid idea because it's not only payment fraud anyway. Yeah, we check with our partner Certify, we check luggage fraud. Yeah, and things like that. So it's not always payment. So my thought here, it's not a good idea to switch off a fraud system.
Okay, great. So before we move on to the collaboration topic, which I think is another sort of major theme here, just to sort of kind of touch on this question once more. So just a kind of message to merchants, what do you advise merchants to do in the SCA world where the legal responsibility lies solely on the issuer to complete SCA, whether or not a merchant actually identifies a good customer or not, in the end, they can't control the consumer experience. Is that not the case? And if that is the case, what role do merchants actually have in this SCA world going forward?
think I would start with, as a merchant, we definitely have a lot of requests from the customers, especially because 25% of the card abandonment rate for the credit cards are because of the 3D Secure. So we always get customer tickets that, could you please turn off the 3D Secure, especially in Germany. We have more of the customer requests. And we always want our PSPs to make sure that it's actually disabled. But of course, they would like to see what kind of business it is, what kind of risky products we're trying to sell. So that's one of the biggest challenges for us. And we would like to disable 3D Secure. And now, because I understand that 3D Secure 2.0 would be more stronger, this could actually be a big challenge for us as well. But at the same time, I think 3D Secure and 3D Secure 2.0, the difference could be, maybe 3D Secure 2.0 could be much more comfortable for the customers, because of course no one wants to copy the data SMS codes to another one, but rather it could be a fingerprint. But as a merchant, we always want to give the best, but of course we don't have that stats that what happens if we disable 3D Secure 100% completely, because we never try to do that. It could increase the reactivation of the customers, but it could also increase the risk. So it's always an A/B testing in different regions and different payment methods.
Thank you.
Maybe I would like to add 3DS 2.0. I think one of the advancement and progress of breakthrough is mobile enabled, right? So before, who tried to do authentication 3DS through mobile with 1.0. It did not work. So now we have this multi-channel. I think we haven't mentioned this before. Fraud is happening also, maybe it's originated in one channel, even could be in the offline, web or mobile, is impacting all channels. So I think the strategy, so from my company as well, is a multi or omni-channel strategy as well. 3DS 2.0, apart that it's being mobile enabled, is also adding a lot of risk-based assessment on a specific event. So we're moving forward to more a dynamic, contextual authentication.
I mean, can I ask, what's your view on the risk appetite of issuers to actually participate in that risk-based authentication across Europe? I think it varies from market to market. And some markets, you know, it's the issuers are very conservative and probably have little intention of participating in risk-based authentication. Others, it's different. So, I mean, do we see adoption of this kind of risk-based authentication to be quite across Europe, or what's your view on?
I believe so, and I think something we didn't mention here: the nature of cross-border transaction in digital. So previously, you have more domestic transactions. So you have now omni-channel. At the same time, also cross-border. You have a Chinese. It's well known that Chinese travelers in Europe, they account for 40 million people. They're doing transactions every day. They're purchasing something in Germany with a locally issued Chinese card, UnionPay. So understanding that context still is a valid customer. You need to be able to challenge that, authenticate, but understanding the nature of that transaction. It's no longer a German domestic issue card purchasing in Berlin. That Berlin guy is now traveling around the world as well.
SCA does have connotations globally because within the EU, if one leg of the payment journey is in or out of a member state, then SCA applies. So this applies to US companies as well, and they are trying to understand the nature of what is required with the customer when SCA is required. Important to realize that, you know, it really only hits high risk in terms of that payment journey. There are, as I mentioned earlier, lots of exceptions with regard to low fraud risks with a particular merchant, acquirer or bank. But SCA is going to be required globally with payments to and from EU states. This includes Britain when we leave Europe itself. Are you disagreeing?
We're not allowed to mention the B word, are we?
They changed that.
Yeah, it started out like that, but they changed it. So any transaction that has one leg out, that they updated it. So any transaction that's got one leg out is no longer part of the PSD2.
What about in as well? So just one
in or out.
So, yeah, so one leg out is out of scope.
Both have to be in.
Okay.
You see, so it's not pretty clear now, and it starts in September, so that's a bit terrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's what, 200 days and counting, is it, to the 14th of September?
Yeah,
and
I think we worry
what's
more
your view
about
on the state of the readiness of the overall ecosystem, particularly with 3DS2? I mean, where do we stand? I mean, you know, do we think all the issues will be ready and all the PSPs and the acquirers and the merchants have upgraded whatever they need to do? Are we all going to be ready with 3DS2 by September?
So we have one other issue before, it's the Brexit. So
yeah, so we're not allowed to mention the B word, I think that's...
Oh, okay. So I didn't say anything. But I'm with you. If you're doing business outside of Europe, then it's not touching you anyway. But you should offer as many payment and checkout options as possible. And I think credit card, yeah, there will be friction, but we will see how this goes.
I mean, I think one challenge, so Square is essentially a merchant aggregator. We provide services to, financial services to merchants. We have hardware solutions, software solutions, now mobile solutions. We operate in many ways as both a PSP and a merchant ourselves. We operate in 5 countries, including the UK. I think one challenge that we're facing with the implementation of SCA and PSD2 is really just the integration effort and the fact that it's expensive. There are very few vendors who can do it, and how do we choose the right solution for us, and will they be ready and able to implement on time? I'm sure folks in this room are dealing with that.
Another question for you, Kelsey. Do you think SCA what's the likelihood of something similar being adopted in the US market? Over what time?
I mean,
is there a kind of global trend towards sort of two-factor authentication?
Yeah, gosh, I don't even like two-factor authentication, but I do think so. So I'll answer it in a slightly different way. So when we were marching towards GDPR last year, right, we implemented solutions within our company that affected all of our markets in anticipation that regulators would follow suit in the US. And I think that SCA is likely to be similar in the US. I will say that 3D Secure 1.0, if you're not familiar with what happened in the US, it failed miserably. Less than 1% of merchants in the US adopted it, and consumers hated step-up authentication. So in the US, our consumers are not used to it, whereas here it's a little bit more culturally acceptable in the European Union and in the UK. So it'll be interesting, but I do think from a regulatory perspective, we're marching towards that.
I think multi-factor authentication is used since many years. The banks, this is just the usual process. If you wanna change your address, okay, then you need to do proof of address anyway. But if you wanna change anything on your bank account, then they step up you with an authentication. You need to remember your secret questions or whatever, or you get sent an OTP via SMS or through the app. However, that's just the usual process since years within the banking space. Of course, having in mind that you guys spend a lot of money for CEO and hire web developers and creative designers to keep the merchant on your side, that he finally buys something, any abandonment rate is terrible. Yeah, but it's just, as I said, you need to get used to that. There is no other way.
We need to get used to higher abandonment rates?
Friction, yeah, to this friction of...
What do we think is going to be the impact of SCA on abandonment rates?
When you
are the stats and the metrics of 3DS one anything to go by?
I mean, if you talk to a company like Square, we are very concerned about it. But the whole premise of a company like Square is to provide a frictionless experience. So for example, when you onboard with us in the US, it's a 5-minute process. You need a name, an address, a social security number, and an email. And you can effectively, if you pass that and some other KYC steps, you can start accepting payments on your mobile phone with us, even through key entered. You don't even need a reader. So from that philosophy, we don't like step-up authentication. We don't like any friction for our merchants or their customers. And so it worries us in that sense, but also I'm coming from a very US-centric viewpoint of that, and so you should take that with a grain of salt.
Well, take a bank in the US called the USAA. They've adopted biometrics. They offer fingerprint, face, voice, and a PIN. They've seen adoption rates go through the roof because it's less friction to use those modalities in their systems. And customers actually can be authenticated via their mobile device even before they get to the contact center on services. So 3D Secure may, I think, cause more friction with regard to SCA, but as I said, if you get back to biometrics, those are the modalities that are getting used by the consumer because of the convenience factor, improves the user experience, makes the bank look a bit more trendy, that they have actually got some technology in there that helps the consumer. So the USAA are probably one of the pioneers in this area, but now many banks in the UK are now adopting this. They're introducing these services within their mobile banking app, but not just the mobile customers themselves, but also web as well. But you'll see in the digital-only guys have biometrics captured within the onboarding process because that's necessary with ID documents and being able to compare that to a particular selfie.
Interesting. Any other comments? I mean, I'd like to just move on to this theme of collaboration. I mean, I think within the sort of part of the upgrade of 3DS is this ability to share additional data with the issuer to allow them to make more informed decisions and stuff. So this idea of sharing data, I think, is a general theme. Do you think it's like time for the industry to collaborate more to fight fraud? And if so, what has been holding back this collaborative effort? Because it seems to be the last one of the last remaining opportunities. What's your view on?
Well, it's competition, isn't it? I mean, every entity out there wants to push fraud away, push it to the weakest platforms and services. So collaboration or co-competition, maybe, if you like, is a bit lacking with regard to sharing data because no bank actually wants to entertain it in any capacity. So, and of course, they're all in competition, not with just each other, but with all the challenges as well that are in the space.
Well, maybe I can speak from our experience. Threatmetrix actually listened to the market. Banks in the UK have asked to get a subset of the data only for banks. So, as Mike Yeardley mentioned before, we have our local network, global network, but banks have the option also to share and to leverage fraud intelligence within the banking finance industry. So we have this so-called consortium. And I think I disagree with you saying, well, worst case scenario, you're passing the fraud to your competitor. I think sharing peer experiences, if you do not prevent fraud, it will hit back at you. So, and I think it's important to see the importance of leveraging the experience. Even if you are e-com, you can leverage the experience of a bank. Banks can see their customer logging in daily basis. They're getting a lot of information of location, behavior, how many times they check their bank account. That information can help others to actually identify a legitimate returning customer. So we do believe as a company strongly in the collaboration within the industries and even cross industries.
I only can say it from a banking perspective, and it's not one of the biggest threats, it's the biggest threat within the banking space is not fraud, it's third-party risk. Yeah? So a solution, so they are just using solutions what's on-premise, on their premise, controlled by their environment. We have a product, they could share all those blacklisted devices between each other, but not one bank is doing it, because they just keep it as a secret. We have no really access to those data, and I think this is not changing very quickly. So I don't know, this moving the fraud to your competitor was a bit a bad example from my side. Okay, but I don't know. Of course, I think within the e-commerce or m-commerce space, using shared data makes sense, of course.
I think within the risk and fraud space, we're obviously a little bit more open to the idea of data sharing because we all have this kind of same goal. I think there are probably a couple of obstacles. The first is, are the data useful? So we had a failed experiment at Square to start kind of a consortium among some large merchants and other payment facilitators. And we did this data sharing effort where we scrubbed and anonymized some card data and some other identifiers and things like that from known fraud events. And we had a really hard time, one, just matching up the data to say, oh, if we had, for example, shared all of these hashed PANs, could we have stopped fraud events from going from us to PayPal to Stripe or something like that? We just couldn't prove out the concept, so that was one thing. We had, on the opposite end, a very successful experiment with a large issuer where we we self-identified low-risk transactions and merchants to them. For example, we have a lot of key entered volume, which shows up as very risky to issuers, and we were getting high decline rates. And so we were sending what we were self-identifying as low-risk transactions to them to bump up approval rates, and that worked. But what happened in the end was the cost of integration and the cost of engineering resources on both sides, we just couldn't scale the project. So over time, I think those two things, are the data useful, and can we integrate in some way that is low cost and scalable across the industry is what's going to ultimately prove or disprove our ability to share data.
I think I would like to add also, for example, the customers are trying to make a purchase, but their issuer hasn't given them notice that you have to turn on their, for example, security, 3D Secure to be enabled. And if 3D Secure is not enabled, the customers get back to us and they complain to us that our 3D Secure is not enabled. I think there should be a communication between the issuer and the customer itself, that from the start maybe they should have the communication that what could be the advantages of 3D Secure and why you should use it. For example, in Germany, a couple of years ago, there was millions of accounts transferred from a normal account to a 3D secure account. So of course, the pins were even sent on a paper in this kind of technology as well, just to make sure that everybody complies to the 3D secure. But of course, example of Germany, 1/3 of the customers have 3D secure enabled, where the rest haven't. It's also possible because they have never tried the high volume transactions, or maybe they haven't purchased anything on the internet before. So it has to be a definite communication. Of course, there could be a risk team, there could be an API, there could be a software, but when it goes to the issuer doesn't have to always give information, but it could also communicate with its customer what are the advantages. I mean, just starting from the basic, and I would say 3D Secure 2.0 could actually be much better because we have a phone, but we don't want to put a passcode, but we just want to have a fingerprint. So I think that could increase the conversion as well. But at the end, there has to be a strong communication when the issuer opens an account for the merchant, for the customer, or if the customer wants to make a payment for the first time, there has to be a strong communication so that the merchant is not actually blamed that 3D Secure is enabled or disabled.
Great. Good. Would anybody like to join the conversation via the mic, make a statement, comment, or question? We've got about 10 minutes left, so if you have any questions you'd like to, or statements you'd like to share with the panel, please grab the mic and put your question that way. Let's address this top question here with 7 likes. Isn't the combination a profile of lots of non-persona data becoming actual personal data? Therefore, is it then ethical to share the personal profile?
I guess this
I think that's
addressed to me, yes. It is a question, but unfortunately, PSD2, even if it's a European regulation, it's seen very different in each country. Poland has a totally other approach to PSD2 than Germany. So there is no one golden answer here. But if it comes to banking, then you opt in anyway. Yeah? They show you what they do to collect device data to prevent fraud. they show you, you understand? So there is already an opt-in. They just need to add their terms and conditions in the background, what they collect, what kind of data. I suggesting they should be open with that. But as I said, it's an opt-in already.
There's a good point about ethical sharing of data and profiles. Everybody in this room would like to protect their own data with any kind of online connected world that we're out there. We know our kids are constantly on the internet with various social media outlets and so on. Sometimes they're not as security conscious with regard to that personal data, but the ship has sailed. GDPR has come in extremely late to protect our data because of the number of data breaches that we've had in the last 10 years. And it's been huge. Our personal data is out there, our usernames, passwords, addresses, date of births. This is all criminals need to basically open up new accounts. Fake passports can be generated digitally now, doesn't need to be actually physically made. They can produce selfies that look real. So that kind of ship has sailed. Ethically, you know, it's good to see a few ethical hackers get into the system to explain what fraudsters, criminals are doing. But it's a battle you win small battles as you carry on, but as we've said, fraud isn't going to go away. And there's a lot of solutions out there that I would, strongly recommend that you have this blend and combination of looking at risk to compare to detecting fraud behavior, as we've mentioned, is one way of doing this. But you need these solutions in place because, as I say, fraudsters will just look for the weakest point every single time. From a bank point of view, the weakest point is the contact center, where fraudsters will try and impersonate you with their data. They will try and find your credit card details and so on. Social engineering is a big factor. Identity theft is another big factor in terms of fraud.
Can we get a mic?
Right, just let me add something also from the vendor's fraud solution at Threatmetrix. With identity data, we call it is a currency of trust. So we see from the other perspective, I agree with the ethical side, but on the other side is your identity and your personal data is protecting you as well. That would differentiate a transaction to be a synthetic identity or fraudulent or bogus activity against your real identity. So having this identity for us, Threatmetrix is a way to identify a trusted, legitimate customer. So don't forget that the main purpose of these solutions are actually to protect the consumer.
Great. We have a couple of questions popping up in the audience. Could we get a mic over? Could you just state your name and company?
I saw in the questions here there are lots of people asking on these exemptions and PSD2 stuff, and it hasn't been evaporated. I mean, we from MasterCard, we really go in the exemption space. I'm absolutely with you. Biometrics is super important and wonderful if it works, but we recognize that there is lots of abandonment, yeah, which we have in this current 3D secure protocol, and probably will also in the second protocol have. We figure 20% or something will probably happen at the end. But with the exemptions, which are there from the PSD2, we believe that the journey, the customer journey, will be way less friction. Yeah? So I highly recommend anybody who has anything to do with merchants, PSP whatsoever, look at the PSD2, look at the exemptions which are out there, and try to flag your authentications, your authorizations in the matter that you're using these exemptions. Because regulators have listened to us. They have listened to us and changed the law in terms of what kind of exemption can be used. So now it's time for the PSPs and merchants to use them. So if you don't do so, then it would be really, I mean, we spend lots of time and money on convincing regulators to have exemptions. So please, I beg the industry, use the stuff. Yeah.
Great.
I mean, we're only talking about high risk. This is where two-factor authentication comes in. And the beauty of biometrics is it just adds that extra layer of authentication. So it's not going to be needed on, you know, standard customers doing their daily banking, their daily transactions. Why put that friction process in the journey? They don't want it, and there's no reason to have it. But you know, expecting that 99% of customers are loyal, abiding, go about their daily business, they just want to do their stuff. It's where it hits risk. You know, something unusual, someone's trying to close an account, a large payment, then you may need that step-up process.
There's another question over here. Could you state your name and company,
Yes.
please?
So it's Rosine de Leeuw from Boulderkamp from the Netherlands. It's actually an extension on the answer on personal data you gave before. I quite agree with personal data and the border is already being crossed, but I also heard from a panel the reluctance on just sharing any kind of data points, even if it's not just personal, just for any other partner in the ecosystem. So how can you actually find the balance on what data points to actually send and just send out whatever 1,000 data points the inquirer of whatever needs? Because that's actually quite a balance you need to find, don't you guys think?
We need a bank on the panel to answer that one. It's a very valid point. There needs to be more cooperation to tackle things like fraud. Sadly, there isn't. It's just huge competition out there for everybody's business. It's a fact of life, and fraud is a cost of doing business, and it's often written off by the banks. I think I read some statistic that over £1 million a day is lost to fraud in the UK alone. Fraudsters are getting away with it for sure. They know the weak points. They will attack anything that they think that they can bypass. So sharing data saying, oh, well, we know this particular fraudster. There are companies that do gather that data on behalf of financial institutions, and that data is shared, and it's known about known fraudsters, but you know, attacks are happening every day from every direction possible, and we mentioned phishing, hacks, and everything else. So it's hard work to get everybody cooperating together in that space, as we all know.
I would actually add a point regarding the fraudsters. So there's also fraudsters sitting at home. For us, for example, we have youngsters, let's say 15 years of age, using their parents' credit card, and later on the parents call us back or message us that it was not me, but we still had all the identity 100%, everything was clear, but we still had to have those kind of chargebacks. So we also fighting against those kind of issues that the fraudster is actually sitting at home, has all the data, has all the access, but we still sometimes lose the case against that.
Interesting.
Well, I'm a bit skeptical that banks, particularly large banks, are sophisticated enough to ingest all of these data points that we could potentially share. So that's kind of the first thing. I think there's probably 3 or 4 that they'll take with the auth message to do their decisioning in step-up authentication. So I think that's kind of the first barrier. I'm talking again from a US perspective here, but that's the challenge that I've run into in the US, is when we talk to large US issuers and we say, what data would you like from us? They say that, oh, we'd like all of it. And then we say, well, what do you want us to pass, and how can we actually operationalize this? That's where the problem comes in. I think the balance might come in just naturally because they won't be able to ingest this data. And one thing that I think about a lot too is we do our own fraud decisioning, or I did at Square, that was my job. I want to be able to receive data from them as well so that I know what's happening. They have a full view of their card holders and what their customers are doing, but I have a full view of my entire merchant ecosystem, and I'd like to be able to improve my machine learning and heuristics from their data. So I think that it will eventually maybe come down to some sort of tit-for-tat thing. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but I do think the balance will be struck naturally because I don't think people will be prepared to ingest it or operationalize these data points.
Question. We have, okay, one final question, actually. We've run out of time, but
I mean, there is EMV core specification on 3D Secure 2.2, and there's 200 data points clearly defined. So for the issuers and acquirers, there is a spec, what kind of data should be transferred, and there's 40 data points which are mandatory. So honestly speaking, every issuer in the future then will put in the terms and conditions this 40 data points if he needs to buy data protection reasons, and will inform his customer. And the other things, we will form groups in the German market, for example, where issuers, acquirers, they should talk to each other, what kind of data points additionally they want to share. And so with the 3D Secure protocol, the new version, we will collaborate on data. And access control servers which are acting for banks are very capable of doing risk-based authentication. They are really good in doing so. We have some of them who have risk-based authentication quotes of stepping up only 10% in the UK market. In German market, some of them stepping up 30%. So issuers themselves know they don't do it good, but the access control servers are well prepared. So I think the new protocol will really improve the situation dramatically.
I agree.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? A final opportunity for a question or statement, comment?
So for the merchants that are here, actually that point is very important that you just mentioned, because this is the first thing that we need to do is actually to comply to those data points. It means that our checkout forms need to have the norms of how do you send the first name, last name, address, etc. And if you haven't checked your checkout forms that are well done and that the data is being sent to your PSPs and to the acquirers in a correct way, then all of this won't actually work for you guys. So it's very important actually to get a hold of that list.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. I think we're going to sort of wrap it up. Thank you very much for your time. We have a sort of networking coffee break now, and then we continue with the next session.